I shall regale you now with the tale of my people. I first met Luke on the first night of university. We were the only ones not drinking that night, and he invited me to his room. My first mistake. His room was on the highest floor of the building, a fact that I would later grow to be grateful for in the extreme, and out of the way of the rest of us in the house, with the third-year transfer students. We had been in the halls of residence for a scant 6 hours. His room was an absolute mess. Boxes overturned, clothes strewn everywhere, a hastily set up Xbox on the side, a smelly beanbag, and a camping chair. At the time, I was naive enough to have not seen the way most people live, and Luke himself was scrubbed clean and in ironed clothes, so I made the assumption that perhaps he had arrived late, or was just a little untidy. We played bad racing games for half an evening, before I got tired of crashing fast-moving trucks into walls for points. We said our goodnights, and I went back to my room on the ground floor. So began my Luke experience, one which was to last for nearly 4 years. Right from the word go, he was a bit of an outsider, tolerated mostly due to habitual British politeness and an unwillingness to be a git. At the time, we weren't even people who could be classed as true neckbeards. I played Magic the Gathering, and one other of our number played Magic, and had a little experience of D&D 3.5. Of course, as such things go, we all ended up getting involved in societies, and by the end of the first term, I was playing in 2 3.5 homebrews and a Unisystem game, but those are entirely different stories. Of course, we passed around what we knew. We all started to dabble in a bit of everything. Luke picked stuff up too, but it was obvious that he wasn't as quick as the rest of us, but we were patient. We noticed 2 things here. The first, that he would act as arrogant as he could in all situations, even the ones where he cast terror on the pit trap, twice. The second, that whenever I lent him a deck, it would always come back strangely a little harder to shuffle. It was at about this time that I started to teach the other members of our group the nuance of Warhammer 40k. As with everything else, Luke picked things up a little slower than the rest of us. This was offset, in part, by the fact that he apparently had the unlimited riches of his parents to call on. Up until this point, we had made light of the fact that he would regularly be seen with a big tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in his greasy, possibly hairy palms. Another one for later if I get that far. But silently wondered how someone could afford to dine on such food with a student budget. Half a week after the rules were passed around and we played a few test games, he turned up in the kitchen with a full 2,000-point Marine Army, complete with 1,000-point Grey Knight, all-metal model detachment for use in larger games. Here begins case study number 1. Case study 1, being a case study of that guy at work in 40k. We left Luke to his own devices in assembling and painting his own army. As it turned out, his modeling left a lot to be desired. Marine chests on upside down, grenades glued to bolters, that kind of thing. And his painting technique seemed to consist of dipping the models in emulsion, then using a Sharpie to draw eyes on the finished product. The beautifully painted, color test models turned out, after extreme questioning with a pair of clothes pegs, to be his sister's work. If you're out there, Luke's sister, I would gladly pay you to paint an army for me. We decided to run a test game. Luke's Grey Knight detachment and my Imperial Fists army versus 2,000 points of Tyranids. We weren't bothered about strict rules since I was the only vet at the table, so out of sportsmanship we allowed the NID players to ignore their force organization limits. Big mistake, but I digress. Fast forward to turn 4, and the Fists have managed to whittle down the huge NID army to 2 squads of bottle caps, Genestealers, 2 Hive Tyrants and a Carnifex, with minimal losses in return. Luke's Grey Knights have hidden behind the Imperial ruins all game and have refused to move. He is grinning like an idiot, beads of sweat pouring down his face. My earwax is starting to melt and leak out of my ears, such is the smell. The assault comes next turn, and my commander, Dreadnought and remaining Marine squads get into position to accept the charge, assuming we'll be backed up by the Grey Knights. The charge comes, and miraculously, there are units standing at the end of it. My commander himself manages to fell one of the Hive Tyrants with his Thunderhammer, whilst the Carnifex smashes the Dreadnought to bits. The Marines on the flank manage to hold out against the other Tyrant, barely. This is the point where the Knights charge in and save the day. We go to the movement phase. He moves the Grey Knights away from the combats. Silence falls over the table, and I give Luke the horrified look of the boned teammate. He grins, exposing his greenish-gray teeth and melting my eyebrows with a halitosis reply.
I'll let you die, and Dehen run in and take all the glory.
Author's note. Luke quotes are correct. He cannot pronounce words with a th sound at the beginning properly. He passes his shooting phase, so no gene stealers die. My mouth almost hits the table at the retardedness of this plan, but he's adamant and sticks to it. I charge the Carnifex with my commander, am wiped out in the next combat, and go to hit my head against a wall. The next turn, the Nids move 12 inches and assault 6, easily getting all of his gray knights. He is wiped off the board in a turn, still grinning like an idiot. In later months, he will boast to people about the match he played where his 1,000-point army almost beat a 4,000-point Nid army that wasn't using the Force org chart. Here endeth case study 1. So, time passes, and Luke finally gets his own magic decks, Samurai, and the UB Broodstar Precon. He is hilariously bad at magic, managing to get into a board-winning position and then do nothing except grin and threaten people he can't attack with, attacking if they don't do what he wants. He then sulks whenever he doesn't win, which is all the time. Meanwhile, the status of my own decks is improving, although some of the ones that he used at the start have to be sleeved. As he grows more unkempt, and I can breathe alarmingly clearly when he is around, I begin to suspect that perhaps his crystallized sweat is what makes the cards sticky. These decks are sleeved, with the exception of one particularly sticky deck, which is incinerated. Around this time, we decide to play a uni-house game of D&D 3.5. A dungeon master is nominated, and we start on the game. The game is hilariously bad and full of DM player characters, railroading and badly written, original fiction, from the DM, who based the entire campaign on his 218-page book in the making. It's another story altogether, but one I might rage about sometime. For posterity, Luke's character background read like this.
I am the leader of a small gang of thieves. We were hired to steal a jewel from the thing of the land. Were in an inn when we were approached by a powerful stalker, who made us go.
He played a chaotic evil rogue in a party of neutral and good PCs, in a setting full of lawful good NPCs, whilst telling them that he was CE and would love if they would help him stab the party up. He then sulked at everyone when he got imprisoned, shoved down holes for being obviously evil, used as a shield, etc. Then, of course, he decided to run his own game. Case study number 2. Case study 2, being a study of that guy being the DM. So as skeptical as we were, 3 of us rolled up 4th-level characters and sat down at the table. This case study will be presented as a blow-by-blow.
Okay, you're on a ship.
How did we get here? Why are we here?
You just woke up on the ship. You're going to another land.
Well, okay. I'll have a look around. Is there anyone to talk to, or anything that looks vaguely important to look at?
There's nothing important to look at, and you are locked in your cabin.
Right, well, if the situation's the same for me, I'll use my open lock skill to try and pick the lock on my door open. Roll, something like 25.
You can't, it is magical and breaks your lockpicks.
Ellipsis. Some time passes, with us trying to interact with the world, and being told that we can't.
Suddenly, the ship starts to roll around and you can hear lightning overhead. The doors swing open on your cabins.
But wait, weren't the doors?
Player 1 and Player 3 shrug.
Okay, anyway, we head up onto the deck. It's been about 5 minutes since the doors swung open, right?
About that, everyone seems to have abandoned the ship. The skies are dark, it's a big storm. A huge wave, must be about 100 feet high, rises up to crash down onto the ship. Make reflex saves.
Saves turn up 5, 15, and a natural 20.
You all manage to leap out of the way.
We assume that a hole opened up in the 100-foot-high wave, which is why we all managed to not be hit by it, and why the ship didn't sink. We managed to find our way to an obviously unsafe life raft, which sinks the moment we get away from the ship. We make our checks to swim, failing miserably, and are informed that we're drowning.
And that's me unconscious too.
You all wake up. You're in a cell, which looks like it's made out of a cave.
Wait, what?
It was all a dream, although you can't tell how you got here. A man in full plate suddenly appears in front of you, laughing. Ha ha, now that you are captured, the resistance has no chance to defeat me.
What resistance?
He then teleports away. What do you do?
Well, I'll try and pick the lock on the cell we're being held in.
You can't.
Bile grin. Once again, I noticed the sweat, including the massive sweat patches under his arms. Well, okay, I'll try and kick the door out then.
On closer inspection, the cell is closed by a completely invisible, indestructible wall of force.
Ellipsis. And so we wait, until his DMPC turns up and dispels the wall of force somehow.
Gosh, we're all really impressed. Who are you?
Blah, 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 leader of resistance, blah, blah, getting killed at dawn or something. Different colored eyes.
Great, so you can help us out of here.
Yes, if you'll help me.
At this point, Luke does an in-character flirt with Player 2. The look on Player 2's face was priceless, and I'll remember it until the end of time. For those who ask, he was taking the back door into becoming a doctor. He hadn't quite got the grades at school, so he was doing a chemistry degree and then a doctorate. Incidentally, if I ever find out he's working near me, I'm signing up with Bupa, even if I have to remortgage my house. So we eventually get out of the prison and find our way to the armory of the castle that we're in. At this point, Luke takes great relish in describing all the magical armor in front of us, unguarded, and the guns. Yes, guns, in 3.5. He'd homebrewed them, 1d12 plus dexterity damage, 17, 20 times 3 critical, and the gunpowder. Doing what any sensible group of players would do in this situation, we took 3 guns each and tried to take the armor.
You can't, it doesn't seem to move off the stand.
No problem, I have 20 strength. We'll take it with us.
So we set light to a trail of gunpowder and ran like buggery whilst the castle exploded. Cue a huge weepy scene from the DMPC that it won't be enough to stop the big bad evil guy's army of thousands, who reside in the one castle that we blew up with them in it for the record, from assaulting us in the morning. We get whisked away to a faggy tree village full of elves who sing and frolic while they try and get the guns off us. No dice, we threaten to shoot any elf who tries. For once, they get the message. However, in the morning, the armor has miraculously disappeared. The army is also attacking, so we rush down to see if we can help. As it turns out, the army was attacking in groups of 3, and the elves were not around at all. So we lay into the army of 3, defeating it easily with our guns of destruction. And then another group of 3, and another, for an hour. As we're getting bored, the big bad evil guy turns up, along with a good 20 of his minions who surround us.
And you won't be able to kill him because he's a level 30 wizard in full plate.
Sickly grin at everyone because he's obviously the greatest DM alive and deserves praise.
Fine, I shoot him then, stuff it.
Rolls a 20, then a 20, then a 20. Aha, instant death.
You shoot at him and just before the bullet hits, he teleports away shouting curses. His army breaks and runs.
Ellipsis.
But wait, if we killed all those soldiers, and then him, doesn't that mean we get experience from the encounter?
Yes.
And since that's X groups of level 5 soldiers, and 1 level 30 wizard, that's enough to make us level 17.
Oh God, what?
Falls off his chair.
At this point, you all wake up in a throne room. There's the wizard there laughing at you, and that is why you must never be set free. He laughs, before disappearing. You are in a force cage in the throne room, but there is a woman in the room that you recognize.
Wait, no, ICBA. At this point, one of our friends, whom I shall refer to as Nyurda, he'll understand why, walked into the room. I, being player 1, promptly ripped my sheet in half and offered him the bottom half. He graciously accepted and role-played the combat legs of my character, whilst I took charge of the skills torso. The game was called 10 minutes later, when we had another dream sequence. Here endeth Case Study 2. Skipping forward about a year. We have moved out of the halls and into rented accommodation. Due to British politeness and general apathy, Luke has managed to follow us into a house, shared with Nyarda and myself. Of course, he demands the biggest room on account of something or other. I think the excuse this time was that he had once been a pro motocross racer, but had fallen off and broken his spine in 4 places. But it was okay because he got better. This was when, deprived of his weekly visits home, we began to appreciate the true strangeness of Luke. We never found evidence that he used the bathroom. As days turned into weeks, we found increasingly that the windows had to be left open 24/7. At one point, as the weeks turned into a month, we noticed that a moss-like substance had actually started to grow on the one shirt that he had been wearing for the duration. His wealth was having a profound impact here as well, as the house began to fill with half-eaten sandwiches, discarded chocolate bars, and Luke's cup, which he always drank orange juice out of. It had not been cleaned since that first night when I met him. I kid you not. The thing was like the holy grail of AIDS. He drank everything out of that cup. Squash, water, wine, beer, tea, you name it. Finally, after an extensive bout of rodent hunting, disposal, and cleanup of the living space, we decided to actually do something about it. We broached the subject carefully at one of our mass gatherings of a card gaming nature. Deck status, most decks fine after being hidden. Luke had decided to use a Golgari deck that I had left on my desk, and it was rendered completely unshuffleable. I lost about £30 of rares in that one, due to the cards sticking together to produce vulturous overgrown putrefy. We started the discussion with a simple question. What time do you guys have to get up to be ready for uni in a morning?
Well, I normally get up quarter of an hour before the lesson,
Crap, as we lived 20 minutes away by bike.
then brush my teeth,
This got a snort.
then shower if I need to.
Huge crap grin, causing most of us to lean back.
Luke, you smell like a mixture of crap and cum. There is moss growing on your shirt. Get a shower and clean yourself up.
He didn't know really how to take that. He mumbled an excuse, left the room, and spent the next week playing Linkin Park really loudly so that we couldn't sleep. This brings me to the end of the first year of my Luke experience. There are more tales, of which I may regale a couple if they're wanted. However, it is 3 a.m. here, so my eloquence is sharply declining. Be warned. I shall regale you once again with the tale of my people. Before we start, I find it interesting in the extreme that I appear to have been stricken by Father Nurgle himself for daring to elaborate on the exploits of a certain that guy, Luke. However, my tale is an important one, and so I shall continue regardless. Apologies for my absence in the last day. Now, are we sitting comfortably? Then we shall begin. First, a recap. Luke is the name of a certain housemate that my friends and I had the extreme displeasure of sharing a house with during most of our time at university. He has already been established as a foul-smelling, unwashed braggart with a penchant for creating monstrously weeaboo DMPCs and turning otherwise positive experiences into foul gaffes of legend. I was surprised to discover that you gentlemen had not heard so many tales about one, that guy, but I guess he was a fairly rare person after all. Despite his being a mess of a human being, with the personal hygiene habits that would disgust a troll, Luke was training to be a doctor. He had access to an undefined fortune given to him by his thoroughly nice, if embarrassed, parents, and flaunted this whenever he could. And now on with the story. Right, fine. Due to popular demand, Case Study 3 being a study of that guy participating in Call of Cthulhu. Okay, so not long after the episode, most of us got into Lovecraftian horror in a big way. It was only natural that Nyrda end up running a COC campaign. He's stupidly good at horror and suspense in games. So, with me as a bystander, COC isn't really my thing and I digress too much to be helpful to a good atmosphere. The game was set. To begin with, a pre-made module, The Fall of Paradise or similar, I highly encourage you to get a copy of Carmina Burana and play through it, for the record. Anyway, the game starts with the exploration of a haunted house. The game progresses smoothly, with a little sanity loss and Luke not saying much. The room is bearable. Despite the balmy evening, Luke has recently returned from a weekend parent visit. He has been hosed down and his clothes have been replaced. He only smells mildly. The party returns to its homes at night. I won't spoil the plot for you in case you want to play it. And Luke's character, having seen a particular painting, starts to have a vision.
You wake up, seemingly unable to move. There are a group of monks wearing dark robes and white plain masks at the foot of your bed. They start to approach you silently.
Oh, okay.
What? Is that how your character reacts?
Yes, this happens to me all the time.
Huge, cocky, Azathoth munching grin. We note that he seems to have escaped without having his teeth looked at. The gums are starting to turn black.
Ellipsis.
So, we continue. Luke receives, and protests for 10 minutes, moderate sanity damage for being stroked by inquisitive monks from ancient Mesopotamia. The game is very, very successful, and runs for several more sessions. We eventually find the party, and Luke's new character, the last having been dispatched by a giant demon spider god with a leg span the size of a cathedral because he annoyed Nyrda enough, being chased by a demonic bloodhound of enormous size and ferocity. They are cornered in a house, and the dog is inside. The party splits up, with Luke following another, that guy, as the rest of the party escape through the back door.
Okay, you two are still in the house, which is shaking. The light outside is fading, and you can hear the growling and sniffing of the dog as it searches for you. What do?
I take a long drink from my hip flask and then go to the toilet.
I follow him.
Why?
I want to see if there's a katana in there.
Huge retarded grin. A weaker member of the group has to leave the room. At this point, Nyarda visibly facepalmed.
Okay, you both get to, the toilet. There is no katana. What do?
I take a long drink from my hip flask and then use the toilet.
I watch and wait.
Oh God, what? Fine. A small time passes. The beast is getting really close now.
Zip. I take a long drink from my hip flask and look for a way out.
Okay, there's a fire escape not far from you. You could get down that if you could batter the door down.
I flush the toilet and go after him.
He's obviously enjoying himself at this point. That guy rolls well on his strength check and gets it open in 2 attempts. The dog is now very close and gaining ground. Nyarda is annoyed by both of them at this point.
So, you're racing down the stairs. You can feel the breath of the dog on your back. It's that close. What do?
I take a long drink from my hip.
Its jaws clamp around your neck before you get the chance. Why did you do something so retarded? You are dead. And you, Luke?
I keep running.
Good choice. The dog seems to be busy with that guy's remains, so you can get away. You remember that the legend says that the dog can only kill 1 being per night, so you're probably safe for now. What do?
I will use my mobile phone to call the police.
Okay, what do you want to say?
I say that I was, just passing by this house when I saw a brutally maimed dead body on the stairwell.
What, really?
Yes, and I'll say that it doesn't have anything to do with me.
The operator asks you to wait there whilst...
I hang up and run off.
You do know they'll trace your phone, don't you, Luke?
They can't. That technology doesn't exist.
Yes it does.
No, it doesn't. My dad worked with the police on some murder cases, and they can't trace mobile phones.
The other Luke sufferer turns his laptop screen round to an entry on mobile phone tracking techniques used by the police.
Well, my mobile phone is untraceable.
Right. The police pick you up within the hour and bundle you into a car.
No, they don't. It's untraceable.
Troll face.
Fine. I get my gun out and shoot at them then.
Needless to say, he died a bullet-filled death as he got shot by trained policemen. He sulked for a while and went to play some loud Linkin Park. It was 4 a.m. at this point, so we got an angry visit from the neighbors. Still, he didn't bother to re-roll, which was a good thing. With only one that guy in the game, it was a lot smoother. At least until the competent and awake party members got abducted. But that's another story. Come to think of it, that's about the time that Luke started whooping in his sleep. A high-pitched, whooping cough that may have been a sleep defect, but was more probably the sound of him loudly cracking one off to Dizzy from Guilty Gear, covered in shit. That revelation caused some IRL sanity loss, but again, another story for another case study. Well, that's me for tonight, guys. There is a lot more of the Luke experience to recount, but my writing is going down the pan. Tomorrow, more Luke. Until then, hopefully our suffering has entertained you moderately. Thank you, eloquent gentlemen, and good night.
Reminds me of another COC game he joined, run by a third, that's right, a third, that guy. This one is the pedophile I mentioned in the last thread. The pissing hip flask drinker is the catgirl player who tried to seduce player characters. Thankfully we ended up never having to see him again after halfway through second year outside of the MTG society at the uni. We were playing in a game where we had to stat ourselves, something that rarely ends well, but this time went pretty fairly. We all got a few little bonuses to stuff that we really didn't deserve, in my case to explosives because I happened to have read the Anarchist's Cookbook once, and had a reputation for setting stuff on fire when bored. In Luke's case, he rolled something with an impossibly high fellowshipy charisma type score, and a katana, and all kinds of crazy martial skills. Because he was a black belt in 3 martial arts, and had the belt above black in another one, and kept a katana under his bed at all times. He also had knowledge, science, because he was a chemist, which somehow, because of his inability to even tangentially obey the rules, gave him a +2 synergy bonus to jump. That's also reminded me of the time we started trolling him in character in another game, and convinced his character through judicious applications of illusions and magic that he was the chosen one of the dragon god, and ended up getting him to lead suicidal charges on stuff. It was actually seeing the Lego robot comic recently that brought all that back, and made us all wonder, hey, whatever happened to him? Come to think of it, that's about the time that Luke started whooping in his sleep. A high-pitched, whooping cough that may have been a sleep defect, but was more probably the sound of him loudly cracking one off to Dizzy from Guilty Gear, covered in shit. That revelation caused some IRL sanity loss, but again, another story for another case study. He loved the shitting dick nipples. I wish I exaggerated.
Where the fuck is the line if being a creepy, unwashed freak that made you constantly want to gag and covered your magic cards in a layer of shit, semen, piss, Cheeto dust, mold, and God knows what else wasn't bad enough? Jesus Christ, you're making Britain look bad. I don't care how disgusting people in America are, we don't have anyone like that. At least no one that is allowed in public.
Luke was mostly unavoidable. In first year, he was in the same halls as the rest of our group. Second year, everyone in those halls split into 2 houses, except the other Luke sufferer who moved in with a third group. Sadly, this included Luke because he pulled an almighty shit fit when he was told where to go. He ended up paying twice as much rent as the rest of them, so they all had to pay less, which they thought waived it. Third year, Nyarda moved out of that house for a work placement. Another sufferer took over his contract. Aside from Luke, it was a damn good house, and the rent drop was pretty substantial. Luke almost pulled another shit fit, however, when he came back to discover other sufferer had taken over the second biggest room and ended up forcing the Luke-suffering right fag above, who is about 6'8" and built to match, into a room that was approximately the same size as a double bed, or he'd default on the contract and leave us in shit with the landlord. He also threatened to sue said landlord unless something was done about it. Luke also was in the same chemistry course as one of us, and thus followed him home, as well as attending all the same societies and social functions that the rest of us did. There really wasn't much we could do to avoid him. The way we eventually got rid of him, as awful as it sounds, was to be rude enough to him till he got the point, and didn't ask him to join us in the house we moved into in year 3, even though we were, and made it clear we were, desperately looking for a last housemate to fill in.
OP here. Oh God, it's 5 a.m. We are collectively shocked, amazed and ashamed of both Luke, for being genuinely like that, and ourselves, for putting up with him. The line is crossed finally next time. Thanks for the warm comments and trolling, TG. Having never had a thread last more than 15 posts, it means a lot. I love you guys.
He spent most of his time outside of the D&D/Magic games, usually in his house's living room, in his room or on a computer chair in the living room watching Neighbors and playing Counter-Strike. As you might guess from the combination of speech impediment, personal hygiene levels, and general social aptitude, he wasn't much of a social person. I exaggerated OP's height a little. I think he's 6'6". He's still a head taller than me at 6'1" though, which is the point. He could lie down on that bed and touch all 4 walls.
So, our first year in the house had come to an end. Nyarda was going to be spending his next year of study in London, which meant he was moving out. Therefore it was time to find a new housemate. Fortunately, one was at hand. Other sufferer from last night, who from here on shall be referred to as Cirque, again he'll understand, was looking for a new house, preferably one with a larger room than the box he had been staying in. It seemed a natural choice. At the same time, I managed to agree with Luke that it was high time that we swapped the room assignments around. A change is as good as a rest after all. Enter Case Study 3B. Case Study 3B, being a case study of that guy interacting with a landlord and fellow tenants. The agreement sank in, and I let it lay for the next month or so, until Nyarda's time in the house was just about up. I helped him move out, enjoying the loud conversation at the top of the stairs where his parents complained about the god-awful stink that was coming from a certain person's room, and then waited until Cirque came around to look over the property. Luke deigned to turn his limp bizkit off and join us. I naturally brought up the issue with the rooms. Beforehand, I had discussed with Luke about how we should draw straws to see who got each room, with the shortest straw getting the booby prize, a room with slightly lower rent than the others, but only big enough to fit a bed inside. Luke, however, had other ideas. Once again he showed us his grin, teeth completely green now, blackened gums with bright red swollen bits. I'm a fairly strong-stomached man, but I confess I had to lean back at the smell of his breath, like he'd been eating roadkill recently. He informed us cheerfully that he was taking the largest room in the house, and that there was nothing that we could do about it. Being the savvy people that we are, we went to get a copy of the contract, which, oddly enough we thought at the time, but realizing our salvation at that moment, stated that the landlord actually had final say in the running of the household, which, we reasoned, was grounds enough for moving Luke into one of the smaller rooms, or at least having a fair draw. Luke would only give us a wild, bloodshot grin when we suggested this. We decided that he was bluffing, due to his persistent superiority complex. This, of course, was a man who claimed that he had once been commissioned by the Secret Service to test their security systems. Such was his hacking skill. They hadn't paid him for this work, interestingly enough. In any case, we thought that we'd have a good chance with the landlord, since he and Luke had been rather chilly since he found out that he'd started shifting his rubbish out of the window and into the back garden. In short, we were wrong. When we approached our landlord, he told us with pained expression that he could do no such thing. "I'm sorry, Walrus," he said, substituting my own name. "But I got a letter the other day from his family lawyer. I can't do a thing until we're done with this." As it turns out, most landlords in the area write their own contracts, which are checked over briefly before being okayed. Luke had gone so far as to have his family lawyer scour the contract for inconsistencies and, being an actual lawyer, had found grounds to contest the contract and force a change in its wording. When we got back, the crap-eating grin and roiling, sweaty face confirmed. He had spent large amounts of his parents' money to ensure that he got to pick which room he wanted, and that he couldn't be evicted by the landlord for his machinations. We had been trolled. With our fury only matched by the viscosity of his breath as it left his lungs, we were legally forced to accept defeat. In the interests of fairness, me and Cirque drew straws for the remaining rooms. I pulled the short straw and moved into the box room. The only consolation was months later when we saw his parents. The drawn, apologetic look on their faces spoke volumes. And so life went on. Mice were purged, we built a furnace in the back garden to incinerate the less toxic rubbish rather than let the bin overfill, and eventually we started shifting the more toxic rubbish into the shed, or into other people's bins to avoid being infected. I didn't get away unscathed, but this is not the time or place to talk about infection. Safe to say that the next few months of my life were agonizing as well as underwhelming. Time passed. Deck status, pretty good. I had successfully managed to keep my more prized decks hidden from Luke's greasy touch with the use of decoy decks, left in my normal hiding places for him to find. I confronted him on this issue, to which I got an angry reply.
"So what if I want to play with a different deck once every so often? It's not as if you were using them at the time. Besides, I let you use mine if you wanted to. The stickiness isn't even my fault. I shaved my palms just last week."
Make of that what you will. Eventually, he agreed to a deal. We would stop ridiculing his hairy palms in public if he would wear a pair of pink marigolds whenever he used someone else's deck. He stuck to this deal for a week and then stopped playing Magic, insisting that it was a stupid, childish game. We were not disappointed.
Christ, I'd forgotten quite how much of these memories I'd suppressed. It's all flooding back in a horrible, horrible way.
I wonder what Luke would say if he saw this. Would he even realize we're talking about him, or would he just delude himself into thinking we're discussing some other asshole?
He'd probably never know we meant him. Although, to be honest, I think we've been unsubtle enough that even he might get it. And frankly, I don't give a shit. Although saying that, knowing my luck, he'll pay the family lawyers to track me down for slander. Luckily, it'd never stick in court, unlike Luke, to chairs.
"Fuck you, Walrus. I have a medical condition. I didn't ask to have greasy paws."
Sadly, I know that's not Luke, because Luke's typing was worse than dyslexic. One of our other good friends, the personification of lawful angry I mentioned in the original thread, being dyslexic and yet still managing to be infinitely more legible, and was often sprinkled with misspelled pseudo-leet. The one that sticks with me, because I used it to name a WoW and D&D character, was his computer's password, Undying Love, cringe, or in his case, 4N13N9, 0V. The characters became Andalin for the record, although for a long time we did use Andalengioff as a war cry.
It was at about this time that we started to turn our hand to real-time strategy games. So, we had a look around all the games that we had with us, eventually settling on Dawn of War. We only had a Dark Crusade disc going, so we elected on a couple of games of that while we waited for the rest to stream. Case Study 4, being a case study of that guy, playing LAN games. A little aside, as mentioned before, Luke was, and presumably still is, a subscriber to the one-upmanship school of socializing. Cirque had recently spent a good chunk of his dwindling money on a brand new computer. It was a glorious beast. Within a week, of course, Luke's bespoke new PC, complete with flashing LEDs, a mouse more expensive than my laptop, and more cooling systems than a Boeing 747, was delivered to our door. It has to be noted that the courier was reluctant to give Luke the electronic signing device and then take it back. In the space of the 10 seconds it took Luke to scrawl his name, the pad had become visibly moist and greasy. I thanked the stars that he'd given up on magic. Of course, then we had to listen to him wandering around the house loudly talking about how great his new computer was. I took the brunt, having no real space in my room to hide. Regular showering was barely enough to fight off the lingering smell that this caused on my skin and clothes. After setting up his PC, we were challenged to a game of Dao, Luke proclaiming himself to be a master of RTS games, citing his victory at a Korean StarCraft tournament as proof. Allegedly, he'd been disqualified because they didn't find out that he wasn't Korean until he'd won the final round. So, with that in mind, we started the computer up, linked them, and got playing. Cirque and I chose Tau, and Luke, Necron. We played for a good 15 minutes, me initiating a rush and then pulling back to allow the game to continue for as long as possible, and Cirque and Luke turtling. I noticed that Luke had captured no objectives at this point, and put it down to him probably not knowing how the game worked. The turtling continued for another half an hour before Luke made a sensible suggestion. Pizza. This was ordered post-haste, and we continued with the game. Pizza arrived soon after, and so we called a temporary truce while we picked it up. Units were set on guard, and we shuffled over to the door to receive our ill-gotten gains. Curiously, Luke was absent. Cirque was gaming in his room and I in the living room, so Cirque got the honor of taking Luke his pizza. He may have sprinkled a fair amount of curry powder on it beforehand, but you'd have to ask him. I took my seat back at the table and idly scanned the battlefield. Near my line of broadsides and fire warrior teams, about 50 or 60 Necron corpses of various flavors. The door upstairs crashed open and Luke came thundering downstairs, bearing down on me like a fabled beast of pungent legend.
You cheated. We said there'd be a ceasefire.
He roared, filling the room with an angry, rotten musk. He'd obviously been concentrating. He was bright red, and the sweat patches covered the sides of his olive green t-shirt. If nothing else, Luke has made me very conscious about the state of my underarms during important events. I questioned his meaning of ceasefire. He'd obviously marched his Necrons right up to my main defensive line.
I had them on passive. I was going to walk them into your base for when we started again.
Needless to say, we called it a night soon after. Cirque feigned a sudden attack of his sleep disorder, and I grew very tired due to a busy day. At this point, I'm going to take a moment of time to answer some of the questions that have already come up in the thread. If people just want me to continue instead, just say so.
Have you found the picture and/or the IC hat?
Unfortunately, we haven't tracked it down yet. We do, however, have a copy of a virus we put onto his computer. Hours of hilarity ensued. I'll divulge on that later.
What a fucking giant waste of money. Just to get a bigger room. Why the fuck didn't he just get his own place if he's got that kind of money to burn?
We think he needed our presence to reaffirm the small part of his psyche that wasn't that guy, that he wasn't a complete waste of elements, which he was.
Wait, what? Who has hairs on their palms? How is that even possible?
We have no idea either. His palms were exceptionally sticky, though. I shook hands with him once and had to scrub the top layer of flesh off to get rid of it. Imagine cleaning a fatty frying pan out and finding that a lot of the bacon fat has rubbed onto your hand.
How heavy was Luke? Was he an obese grognard, a gangly asshole, or in between?
About medium size, not tall or short. Claimed he was 6'6" inches. God bless you, America, and your sensible imperial units, which is as tall as me. His smell was definitely bigger than him.
OP, did you find his name on the medical register? In the interests of preventing libel, I'm not asking for his full details, of course, but if this man was ever certified as a GP, I will demand the total and absolute immediate disbandment of the NHS.
And finally, no. He won't appear on a register for another few years, if he passes at all. His grades at school weren't quite good enough to get him straight onto a medical course, so he was doing a master's in chemistry first, then studying medicine. We probably have another 3 or 4 years yet. Still, Watch this space for Luke flu, or Nurgle's rot, whichever you prefer. I think that'll do for an intermission. Did you all remember to get your ice cream from the salesman and visit the toilet? Excellent. Continuing in the next post.
Feigned an attack of sleep disorder. Man, that was the best excuse ever.
I think at this point, we will talk a little of revenge. You see, Luke had an almost spiritual connection with his computer, if such a thing were possible. He loved it deeply, and often. He loved the perceived prestige of having a good computer too. He did have a top-of-the-line laptop as well, but would always use as much of his effort to transport the desktop PC with him wherever he went, if possible. This included the Uni LAN Gaming Society, other friends' houses, and Uni itself if he needed to do work that existed on his own hard drive. And he loved to let people have a go. He would, wherever possible, try and coax people into using his hardware to see how good it was. I tried this myself once. He insisted, and being even more apathetic then than I am now, I reluctantly accepted. The PC was in his room. That was the first time I'd seen the inside of Luke's room since he'd taken over in the summer. Words can hardly describe my horror, but since I'm meant to be telling the story, I will do my best. On the windowsill, a grimy vase with some dead flowers in, possibly tulips, visible from behind half-opened, stained curtains. The light cast into the room is orange in color due to the time of day and coloring of the curtains, highlighting the answer to a question that Cirque and myself had asked each other for weeks. Where has the cutlery gone? No less than 6 plates, in assorted levels of moldiness, most of the forks and a lot of knives too. No less than 6 almost empty tubs of B&J ice cream, with various amounts of culture, ranging from Manchester to Vienna in advancement on the world city's culture scale. The floor was almost invisible, but a large chunk of carpet was missing, obviously eaten away by some substance or creature. I barely had a moment to take all of this in before the smell hit me. Rancid is too mild a word to use in these circumstances. I think a cross between curdled milk, old rooms, and pig manure might suffice. I was hastily welcomed into this inner sanctum by Luke himself and placed on a moist swivel chair in front of the computer. He placed the headphones on my head quickly, sending a chill of abject horror down my spine as they stuck slightly to my ears. He then proceeded to tell me all about the specifications of his computer before leaning right over me to log himself in, catching me in the face with the side of his sweat-stained shirt. My line had finally been crossed. I made my excuses and left. The clothes I never wore again. Indeed, I took the first opportunity to lose them. I shaved my head and showered for a good hour before I felt clean enough to take a shower. I never set foot in that room again for the rest of Luke's tenure, but of course, what happened when I did is a story for later on. A line had been crossed, and revenge was the order of the day. Starting with Luke's computer. We eventually managed to coax Luke into moving his computer downstairs for a night, under the pretense of an executive LAN party evening, where we would all sit around our table on swivel chairs and play games where we could see each other. He gladly agreed, having an opportunity to both show off his computer again and his swivel chair, which of course he had bought especially because it was better than we could afford. The stage was set, the pizza in, and our material prepared. Case Study 5, being a case study of that guy's reaction to a fake virus. Luke, as aforementioned, had proclaimed himself a master hacker, employed by the Secret Service to aid them with security. We brought him onto this topic of discussion slowly over the course of the night, whilst ensuring that his cup, as mentioned previously, was topped up. His current beverage of choice being Lipton iced tea, infused with the strata of orange juice and coffee remaining in the cup. Eventually, of course, nature called, or possibly whispered, and Luke grumbled something, made sure all our games were paused, ensuring that he managed to touch our hands with his at least once in the process by grabbing our mouse hands, and shuffled to the toilet. We took a moment to lift ourselves from the shock of being touched by Luke and move to his computer. A picture will follow, posted by Cirque. Thanks.
The original image, taken from the email with the original little codepiece circa November 2005, still sitting in my Hotmail account. Being the techie guy landed me with the job of putting everything together, although the pieces were contributed by Walrus and Nyrda respectively. 8 billion hours in MS Paint. Still waiting on the actual picture of Luke sadly. I've pinged Nyrda last night to see if he still had it, but he's probably out drinking still, so I've not had a response. As for the actual image I just posted, I want you to bear in mind that Luke was convinced this was a legitimate virus. The abject crappiness was completely the point. We were trying to see how blatant we could make it before he could catch on. The best part was that he never did. I'll grant you the story is exaggerated a little in some places, but almost exclusively not where you'd think. His odor and hygiene were actually that bad. It's given me, and I think everyone who's met him, a very healthy respect for our own bodies, and the impact we might have on others if we choose not to take care of them properly.
Where the heck did this all happen? There's something oddly familiar about the way you guys talk about accommodation in societies that makes me think this wasn't too far off from me.
University of York.
Aside, how to create your own fake virus. Step 1. Get a friend who can create executables, or do it yourself if you know how. Thanks, Cirque. Step 2. Create a NAF wallpaper. Step 3. Using a clip drive, transfer the executable and the wallpaper to your recipient's computer. Hide them in a safe folder. Step 4. Change all desktop shortcuts so that they link to the executable. Load up the wallpaper. Step 5. Use your fuse box to fake a momentary power cut. We worked more efficiently than we have worked before, or since. By the time Luke came back from the toilet, the desktop PCs were rebooting and running through scan disks. Luke, of course, had such a good computer security system, designed by himself no less, that he did not need to run a scan disk. No worries, he assured us with his grin, we would all be getting beaten again very soon. Grin check. At this point, I was sure that Luke's mouth was beginning to rot, such was the smell of decay that came from it when he opened his mouth. His teeth were approaching forest green in color. Unfortunately for Luke, his computer had been infected by the dreaded GNU virus that Cirque and I had read warnings about over the past week. Luke, of course, was quick to ascertain that he knew the guy who had created the virus, ironically true, and had trained him himself against it, not so true. This would be no problem to a hacker of his skill. We eventually called the night due to Luke's faulty computer, wouldn't want to catch it off you, and went to bed. Cirque may have erased the executable at some point, but he never said. There were a lot of raging sounds from his room though, revenge tasted very sweet indeed.
Thanks, Cirque. Actually, that was all Nyerda. All it was a simple 00 print the GNU team pounds you, 01 go to 00. That was set to run full screen and couldn't be closed unless you rebooted, and was set as a replacement for every shortcut he had. There was also the other time I pulled the old, take a screenshot of the desktop and set it as the wallpaper, then hide all the icons in a folder trick. That left him hammering at his mouse convinced it was broken, before throwing it on the floor in rage, and going and getting his other $200 mouse. Which then also didn't work. I dropped a hint that maybe it was the GNU virus again, but, you know.
So again, time moves on and perhaps sadly, we come to the last major case study of living with that guy. The world turned, and spring turned into early summer. Luke had thankfully been abducted by his parents several times over the intervening months, with predictable results. The raw, scraped look of a man who has been forcibly pushed down a stretch of white water rapids, with a barber's shop at the end. Each time, the same cycle of filth built up. It was at one point where Cirque and I had just managed to find evidence of the end of the squirrel infestation that Luke announced that he would be looking to move into a house. There he stood, in all his encrusted glory, with a look in his eyes that perhaps implied that there was some part of him that truly, honestly, needed us. He was looking for a house for next year's study, he informed us, as the landlord had refused to renew the contract and was looking for new tenants after the end of the current tenancy. Me and Cirque exchanged a look, and I gave possibly the most meaningful response I have ever and may ever give. Right then, good luck with that. He never spoke to us again. He left for his room, and soon we heard loud rap music permeating through the floorboards above the living room, a cacophony that was to last for several days before he was threatened with an ASBO by the neighbors. His smell lingered for a while, then went to join him. But that, of course, is not entirely the end of the tale.
You've hit the nail on the head there. His parents and sister were charming. Seriously, kindness itself. Luke was just an aberration. I always found myself feeling really sorry for the parents. But on the other hand, you have to ascribe some level of blame to them.
Case Study 6, being a case study of that guy's room after his departure. Luke left several weeks later. Cirque and I had found accommodation elsewhere in a house with our other friends and acquaintances from the society. As all of you will know, however, an integral part of the end of a tenancy is the cleaning up of the house in order for viewing to take place. We elected to draw straws for cleaning tasks. We would each clean our own rooms, of course, and then draw straws for division of tasks. On one side was Luke's room and the bathroom. On the other side was the living room and the kitchen. I drew Luke's room. Not one to back out on a deal, I donned my old clothes and gloves, drew a deep breath, and opened the door to the room. The first objective would be the windows. If I could open those, the smell would start to disperse from the room, allowing me to work without retching too much. The door was difficult to open. Several seconds of pushing followed, without success. In the end, I took a couple of steps back and threw my weight against the door.
Short straw Luke's room. I'll grant you that Luke's room was bad, but aside from the strip in there where we were winning the battle to keep the bathroom clear of Luke filth, we had to dispose of mop heads every foot or so of cleaning. Wringing them out didn't get rid of the, for want of a better word, solid organic matter. Nothing internal mind, we wouldn't have stood for that, but the amount of very clearly Luke's hair and footprints and how the fuck he did it when he didn't even use the shower. There was a fine white grease mist on the windows of his room that I had to go back and clean with oven cleaner to remove. So much rage.
Of course, with the momentum of my not too modest weight, I ended up inside the room, on my knees. The first thing that struck me was this. The object obstructing the door was the aftermath of a refuse avalanche. I was currently knee-deep in cocktail sausage packaging, half-finished pot noodles and, disturbingly, clumps of hair. Then the smell hit me. Before it was merely extraordinarily foul. Now, the coming of the warmer weather had combined with the mounting refuse to create, well, I resolved not to breathe and focus on the objective. I waded forward past the landslide, dislodging a bag that contained hundreds of tiny flies, clouding my vision. My eyes watered as the smell overpowered my senses, and the wax began to melt in my ears. Every inch of uncovered skin itched, such was the foulness of the place. Finally, I made it to the window and pushed it open, dislodging a year and a half of dust and corrosion. Sweet air. I took a deep breath and waded back out of the room. Obviously, the room needed to air out a little. Cirque didn't mind, as long as I got rid of the clothes I had worn and didn't go anywhere near him. I showered.
Tiny black flies. Oh God, the flies. It took us so long to make the now obvious connection with the flies and his room. We'd assumed there had been some food off in the bin, which, as is often the way in student houses, was often piled 2 feet high with pizza and takeaway boxes, and had a big run of sterilizing the kitchen. Seriously, you're bringing back the most horrible memories. Like his bag of potatoes. How on earth did I manage to suppress all this?
A couple of hours later I returned, in a different set of old clothes. The air was bearable at least, but the rubbish would have to go first. Our bin was already full, so it was time to employ the shed to hold the refuse while we waited for night to fall, to deliver presents to unwitting neighboring bins. Rubbish collection and movement is never a nice task at the best of times. Luke had never used a bin bag to store his waste in, so the first task was to gather everything into easy carrying devices. Of the rubbish, the more notable pieces contained Luke's book, which has been alluded to before but not extrapolated on by myself, heavily used and stained with a green, slightly viscous substance. Smell confirmed as cum, much to my revulsion. No less than 6 of the 8 houseplates, with large amounts of furry mold growing from their surfaces, and in one case the underside as well. The remains of the dead flowers, also covered in mold along with the vase, 2 heavily used pornography books depicting a feces-related fetish on the encrusted covers, the remains of a pizza, possibly the one from Case Study 4, covered in flies with evidence of maggot infestation. I resolved to be a better person for the rest of my life, if only I never had to do this again. Waste successfully moved, I surveyed the room at large. The carpet was caked in dirt, hair, and an unknown substance. The area of the carpet that had been eaten away during my last visit had grown significantly to about a half-foot in diameter, blackened around the edges. This revealed the large hole in the skirting board, the area littered with droppings concurrent with the squirrel infestation. The furniture in the room had been left largely intact, but with a thin coating of waxy grease. He had left his cup, which had started with a drinking capacity of about 1.5 pints, but now could carry as much fluid as a champagne flute. This was hastily disposed of. The house cutlery, although tarnished, would survive. I put them to one side to give to Cirque later. The curtains were removed, to be washed. This dislodged a small rain of dirt and grime from the top of the curtain rail, where it had collected. The windowsill was caked with dirt, presumably from when the vase of flowers fell over. This would only be removed with a wallpaper stripper. I moved over to the last part of the room that I hadn't surveyed yet. The bed. The duvet and sheets, of course, would have to go. I pulled them from the bed. What I saw there caused a hasty retreat to the bathroom. A large black stain, at groin height on the mattress. Yellowed at the edges, but only just noticeable. No smell, blessed be, but enough to make me retch my dinner into the toilet pan. Eventually, after I had composed myself, I called Cirque and showed him, with similar consequences. We turned the mattress over and resolved never to speak of it again. We moved the furniture in such a way that the holes in the carpet were concealed, and scrubbed the floor as best we could. Once all of the grime was removed, it was about 3 a.m. in the morning, just in time, as the first house inspection was in the morning. The house inspection went reasonably well. We had worked our hands raw for most of the previous 48 hours, so we were glad of the rest. The landlord, too, was pleased and impressed. Liberal and strategic use of air freshener had all but obliterated the lingering smell. Only a slight metallic tang to the air remained. The prospective tenants were 3 South American exchange students, all female. They liked the living room and kitchen, found the bathroom and smaller bedrooms to their liking, and really liked the location. Just one room left. The landlord looked over their heads at us, pensively. We nodded slightly, and with a deep breath he opened the door to the room. We went downstairs to get a cup of hard-earned coffee. We could do no more. I will never forget the screech of horror, disgust, and revulsion as he turned the mattress over. Surprisingly, he managed to secure the deal. We gave him an inventory of the damages to the room, which he assured us he would claim from Luke. We moved out a week later into our new home. We were followed.
The landlord actually did chase after Luke for damages, and to get a cleaning bill. He was actually reasonably nice about it from what I saw, although Walrus would know more as he was usually the face of the house. I'm fairly sure he came out and said fairly explicitly that he knew none of it was our fault, and that he wasn't going to hold us directly responsible. Bastard did steal all the bricks we'd built into a homemade blast furnace in the backyard though. Still bitter about that. Luke's beard was stranger than that. It was less stubble, and more really long gray blonde hairs, mustache and all. At least I assume gray blonde. They may have been ginger under there, I honestly don't know or want to know. He also had disgusting lanky hair and a sort of center-parted bowl cut that gradually grew out into some kind of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo type monstrosity. I'm presuming because no hairdresser would touch him.
About a week after moving into our new house, we had a knock at the door. It was, to use the cliché, dark, cold, and slightly drizzly weather, so we were surprised to get a visitor, especially during our 10-way magic night. It was Ronek, our new, lawful angry housemate, who let the visitor in and welcomed him. As my nose shut down in self-defense, I realized who had darkened our door. He had apparently managed to locate us from talking to people on our respective courses. He had then made the trip across our city to find us, in the drizzle, to tell us all about the flat that his parents had got him in the middle of town and that his internet wasn't working yet, so he would use ours. Sure enough, within half an hour of his entry, all conversation had shut down bar Luke talking about his newest laptop and all his new friends. The conversation moved onto the old house.
It was awesome, wasn't it, guys?
He said.
I can't believe we had to leave. Still.
He grinned, exposing a mouth of clearly rotten gums and olive-hued teeth.
It's not as if it was much of a problem to move out, was it? I bet you guys had to spend ages clearing your rooms out, though. They were awful.
A silence descended on the room. After what seemed like an eternity, Cirque broke it.
Get out.
And that was the last time we really ever saw Luke, thankfully. I did have the misfortune to bump into him outside a curry shop in the December of that year. His approaching musk was easily distinguishable over the curry spices, which sent that familiar primal dread coursing through my body. Thankfully, I managed a convincing impression of a German exchange student, which confused him for long enough that I was able to flee while he saw through my disguise on account of me not having a German accent and looking like me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was our Luke experience. There are, of course, other stories. But those might be for another time. Oh, one last thing. Cirque and myself did visit the old house once more, a few months after we'd left to collect some belongings that we had forgotten in the move. As we waited for one of the girls to return with our things, we had a quick look around. One of the other girls smiled at us, with greenish teeth. The house was starting to encrust with filth. And here endeth the tale. I have apparently been the walrus. Thanks for your attention. It has been a pleasure. Sweet dreams.
It's a long shot, but if our Luke sufferers are still present, there may be a picture of him here.
I might lapse from my normal posting style. Oh, sweet Jesus, there he is! The face of all those memories.
I love the way in both he seems to darken the room around him. It's definitely him on the right, on the second picture either way.
The second picture, far right, is Luke. Looks like he's just come back from his parents, judging by the state of his hair, beard, and only slightly grimy skin. Note the distance between him and other people. That is a necessary zone of precaution.